Imagine yourself sitting in a warm train as it winds slowly upward from Landquart toward Davos. Outside, the mountainsides drift past, covered with glittering snow that sparkles in the evening sun like millions of tiny diamonds. At Davos station, you step out and the clear mountain air wraps around you like a cool embrace. The sun hangs low in the sky, and the peaks are draped in long shadows. The snow glitters beneath your feet like millions of diamonds. You make your way out from the town, past small houses with smoke rising from their chimneys, past trees bending under their white burden. You walk about 2 kilometers up a hill, and then you see it. A small house nestled between tall, dark firs that stand like sentries. Smoke rises from its chimney, and light spills from the windows. Here lives a remarkable woman. Her name is Ella, and she is an Avalanche dog handler. Her entire life revolves around her dogs, around rescue work, and those mysterious abilities that sleep in a dog's nose. Abilities older than the mountains themselves. When you arrive, 3 large Saint Bernard mixes greet you at the door. They're not aggressive, but gentle, alert, their eyes bright as mountain streams. Ella appears, a woman in her early 50s with crow's feet around her eyes, marked by years spent in wind and snow. She smiles at you and gestures toward the dogs. "That's Bella, Kaya, and Max," she says. "They're my best friends and my most important work partners." She leads you into a cozy sitting room with large windows overlooking snow-covered slopes. A fire crackles in the fireplace, and everywhere you look, there are photographs. Dogs in avalanche snow, Ella with her animals at rescue operations, moments full of tension and triumph. She serves you hot tea with honey and begins to speak. "You might not know how an avalanche dog works," she says quietly as the dogs settle around the fire. "It's not just training. It's something much deeper. A dog can smell a person under 4 meters of snow. Imagine that. 4 meters. That's like the body of a large lorry. And yet they can sniff, sniff, sniff until they find the person." She leans back and watches Bella, who's just closing her eyes. In training, we don't just learn to command them. We must understand their instincts, those ancient drives that sleep in every dog. Bella, for example. She comes from a line of Swiss mountain rescue dogs. Her grandmother rescued over 100 people from avalanches. This isn't just training, it's heritage. It's in the blood. When I watch Bella work, I see her entire lineage. I see generations of dogs who've devoted their lives to saving people. She stands and retrieves a large book from the shelf, a documentation of her work full of photographs and notes. "These are my journals," she says. "Year after year, I record how the dogs train, what they learn, what problems they face. Max, for instance, he was afraid of helicopters for a long time. The noise was too much. I trained with him for months, slowly acclimating him to the sounds. Now he flies without worry into the rescue areas." You settle back and watch the flames dance in the fire. Ella tells you about an operation 2 months ago when, after a large storm in the Parson area, a skier went missing. The conditions were terrible. Heavy snow falling, almost no visibility. temperature far below zero. Rescue teams normally use probes and transceivers, but Bella, she's often faster. I went up with Bella together with a mountain rescue team. The search crew was discouraged. They knew time was against us. A human's heat signature fades quickly in such cold. But Bella, she understood her task. She grasped the importance. I let her sniff, and suddenly, quite suddenly, she ran directly toward a snow mound. She scratches and digs with her paws, as if she knows that beneath this white grave, a life is waiting. And under 2 meters of snow, we find the man. Unconscious, but alive. That's what Bella does well. She saves lives, and she knows that she does. She takes a sip of tea. Her eyes are moist, though not sad, rather filled with the weight of this responsibility. After an operation like that, we come home and Bella sleeps 16 hours. She's given everything of herself. Her sense of smell, her strength, her devotion, her whole soul into the work. And I sit there, as I'm sitting with you now, and I'm grateful. Grateful for this partnership, for this bond between dog and human that runs deeper than words. You see, when I look at Bella after she's worked, I don't see exhaustion. I see fulfillment. She has a purpose, a goal, and she lives for it. That's what I love about this work. Max gets up and rests his head on your knee. You stroke him and he snorts contentedly, his whole body relaxing as though he's placing all his tension into your hands. Ella watches this with a gentle smile. Max is the youngest of us three. He's still learning, but his instinct is incredibly sharp. Sometimes we train at sunrise, when the mountains rise from the darkness like whales emerging from the sea, and the air is so cold that every breath tastes like tiny ice crystals, like diamonds on your tongue. Max loves this time, when the world is still quiet, when there's only him, me, and the mountain. She tells you about the various techniques, about how the dogs learn to work under extreme conditions. But what moves you most isn't the technique. It's the love woven through every word. This woman trusts her life and the lives of others to her dogs. And the dogs understand this. They feel this responsibility in every fiber of their being. As the night deepens, Ella takes you outside into the garden. The sky is clear and starlit, and the constellations glitter above the snow-covered peaks. The air is so cold and so pure that every breath burns. But it's a good burning, a burning that reminds you of being alive. "Do you see up there?" she asks. "Orion? He's particularly bright in the mountains. My grandfather told me that Orion is the hunter, and that the mountains too are hunters. They hunt away the unworthy and keep the strong. That's what my dogs do too. They hunt through the snow, searching for life." You nod, and she points to a single light on the horizon. "That's the Parsen hut. Up there, where we trained Bella last week." For a moment, you're both silent. Two people in the stillness between snowy peaks, beneath a sky full of stars, thousands of years old. Back inside, the dogs are already sleeping, their sides rising and falling steadily. Kaya snuffles quietly in her dream. Perhaps she dreams of an operation, of a rescue, of that moment when she finds a scent beneath the snow. Ella prepares a guest room for you, with thick blankets and warm woolen pillows. The windows are frosted over, and outside you can see the outline of the mountains, black against the star-filled sky. "Sleep well," she says. "Tomorrow perhaps we'll train, if you'd like. You'll see how Bella and the others work when the sun rises over the slopes. It's impressive to see how they focus, how their whole body and mind go into the task." You lie down, and warmth wraps around you immediately like an embrace. Through the window, you see a mountain, sharp in silhouette against the night sky, with stars glittering above its peak like ice in the morning. You imagine an Avalanche dog handler and her animals walking through the snow in the night, their noses ready for work, ready to save lives, ready to make the impossible possible. You imagine how the dogs smell, not just air, but thoughts, feelings, the essence of a person lost in the white, and the dogs find them, and life goes on. Sleep now, warm and peaceful, while the mountains watch over you, and the Avalanche dogs practice their next rescue in their dreams. Today, in the compartment, a woven basket next to another passenger. Food inside, fruit, bread, cheese, sausage. A life in this basket. The smell is good, is old, is warm like a memory. You smell it and you're gone instantly. It's 1924. The train travels from Bamberg to Lichtenfels, and beside you sits a man with willow switches. He's not young, but not old either. Perhaps 44, perhaps older. His face is brown from sun and hard work, and his hands are covered with fine lines like a topographic map of an unknown country. The man wears a loose linen shirt, open at the neck, and rough cotton trousers. On his lap lies a large bundle of willow switches, freshly cut, still green, still smelling of forest and water and life. "I'm a basket maker," he said, before you could ask, as if he knew the question was in your eyes. "And this here," he pointed to the switches, "are the best willows from around Bamberg. I've just been to buy them from an old man who's already 90 years old. A man who still cuts the willows the way he did 50 years ago, by hand, with razor-sharp knives older than his son." He picked up one of the switches and showed you how thin, how even they were, how perfect. "A good willow switch," he said, "is not just wood. It's patience. This switch is 5 years old. The tree was small, and every year it was tended, pruned, combed, so to speak, the way you comb a wig. The man who grew this willow died before the switch was harvested, but his grandson harvested the switch with great respect. This is a craft that runs over generations, over decades." The basket maker was from Lichtenfels, he explained with pride in his voice. A small village in Upper Franconia, but famous throughout Germany for basket making. "My father was a basket maker. My grandfather too. My great-grandfather and his father. We come from a family that started making baskets 200 years ago, long before industrialization. Now, when I return to Lichtenfels, there are perhaps 30 basket makers there, fewer year by year. The factories make faster, but they don't make better, they make cheap." The brass lamp above the train swung in its cast iron holder. The man took other switches from his bundle and showed you the different kinds. One was thinner, fine as thread. Another thicker, hard, for the frames. The third was peeled, white and silver. The fourth still with dark bark. "You need each switch for different work," he said. "For the bottom of a basket, for the sides, for the edges, for the handles. Everything must be right. Everything must be correct." "And how long does it take you to make a basket?" you asked. The man laughed softly, a laugh like water flowing over stones. "That depends on what kind of basket. A simple basket, like this," he pointed to a smaller one beside him, 2, perhaps 3 hours. A big basket for laundry, a heavy basket, 5 to 6 hours or more. A really beautiful basket, one that lasts 100 years, one that's passed down from grandfather to grandson. That can take 2 days, sometimes 3. But you see, in those 2 or 3 days, not much happens that you can see from outside. You only see that a person sits there and works with their hands, always working. But in reality, the person is thinking. The basket tells the maker what it wants to be. The basket speaks. He explained to you the art of weaving, a science and a philosophy at once. How you soak the switches in warm water so they become pliable like silk. How you twist them in spirals. How you maintain the tension so the basket becomes round and not crooked. How you find the balance between tight and loose. "It's like music," he said. "You have to have a feeling for the rhythm. Left, right, top, bottom, tight, loose, firm, free. It's a dance of the hands with the material." The man also showed you the different kinds of baskets he made. The market basket, large and sturdy, for daily shopping. The laundry basket, even larger, with sturdier materials. The fruit basket, small and elegant. The fish basket, airy so the fish doesn't stink. The flower basket, with white paper inside. "Each basket is for something specific," he said. "And when you know what for, you make it right. The hand knows automatically how tight, how loose, which switches." The man told of the markets where he sold his baskets. Bamberg, Erlangen, Nuremberg, Würzburg. Everywhere in Franconia, a different place each week. "People," he said, "don't understand why a woven basket costs more than one from a factory. But," and here his voice became solemn, sacred, "a basket that a human makes with his own hands, that human gives it something infinite. It's not just use, it's love. It's the prayer of the hands." He also spoke of the difficulties, of times when the switches weren't good, or when a disease struck the willows and the yield was poor. 1920 was a terrible year, he said. Frost in May. The willows were damaged, the switches broke too easily, they were no longer elastic. I could hardly work all year. I had to do other things, repairs, small jobs to feed my family. But I didn't give up. A basket maker doesn't give up. "Love?" you asked, surprised, for the word was unexpected. "Yes," he said. "When I sit here and make baskets, I think of the women who will carry this basket. I think of the bread that will lie in it, still warm, golden, the family's bread. I think of the flowers, of the earth, of the vegetables from the garden. I think of the generations who will use these baskets. My father showed me a basket his father made in 1880, 44 years ago. The basket still exists. It's been mended here and there because it's been used, because it's been loved. But the structure, the soul of the basket, that's still there. That's what I do. I don't just make baskets. I make eternity. The man also showed you how he repairs a basket when it grows old or damaged. Sometimes someone comes with a basket 40 years old and says now it's broken. But no, it's not broken. It's just tired. You only need to repair it, weave in new switches in some places, and already it can live another 40 years. You asked him how many times you could repair a basket. Unlimited, he said, as long as there are willows, as long as there are hands. The train leaned into a gentle curve. The man handed you a small basket he'd just finished, as large as your open hand, a miniature masterpiece. "That's for you," he said. "You're a good listener. Not many are good listeners. I wish this small basket to accompany you, that it brings you luck, that it reminds you of my hands, of these hours." You wanted to protest, gratefully protest, but the man stood up. "We're arriving in Lichtenfels," he said, and looked out the window where willows grew, entire fields of willows, thousands of trees, all ready one day to become baskets. "My home, where I make my baskets, where I'll die, perhaps. And perhaps someone after me will make a basket like me, with the same thoughts, with the same love." "The baskets I make," he said still, "are not for today. They're for tomorrow. They're for the next generation. When I make a basket, and it's strong, and it's passed on, from grandmother to granddaughter, then I live. Then I'm immortal." The basket next to the other passenger is now packed, wrapped in paper. The smell of fruit drifts away. But in your hands you hold the small basket tight, warm as a heartbeat, durable as a promise that never breaks. You hold the basket like a relic, like something sacred. The willow switches, the hands of an old man, the love woven into it, are heavy as gold. They carry you away. The train rocks you very gently to sleep. I boarded on a Friday afternoon in Stuttgart, the sun already low, and winter had made everything a bit harder. The air, the faces of people on the platform, even the train doors seemed less welcoming. But when I came into the carriage heading to Tübingen, it was warm. The heating purred quietly to itself, and the windows only fogged at the very corners. I thought I was alone at first. Then I saw her in the back part of the compartment. An older woman, perhaps 70, with white hair she'd loosely knotted. She wore a dark blue coat with something grey underneath, and she was knitting. I could have sat anywhere, but I took a seat 3 rows in front of her. That seemed right. Close enough not to seem unfriendly, but far enough not to be intrusive. She didn't look up. Her eyes were fixed on her work, on the needles moving with a gentle rhythm. Click, click, click. It wasn't loud, not dominating, but it was there. It was present. The needles were wood, light and dark striped wood needles, not metal. That gave the clicking a warmer quality, a muted but absolutely audible melody. The train lurched forward. It was one of those moments where you don't know if you should shift or stay still, whether the train is moving or just shuffling its platforms. But then you felt it, that gentle acceleration, and Stuttgart's houses began slowly drifting past. Grey, beige, orange. So many colors I couldn't name straight away. The woman knitted on. Click, click, click. It was soothing, this sound. It was like the pulse of the machine beneath us, but more human, more personal. Or no, it was like another pulse altogether. The train's pulse was deep and inevitable, metallic. Hers was alive. That's the best word for it. After a while, perhaps 10 minutes, I realized I'd made her sound the metronome of my thoughts. I wasn't thinking in words anymore. I was thinking in that rhythm. Click, click, click. The train fell into the same beat, or I imagined it did. It doesn't matter. The result was the same. A kind of drowsing, conscious but not quite present, not quite here. The woman said something, very quietly. I thought at first she was speaking to me. She said, "Blast." Not angry, not despairing, just matter of fact. She'd noticed a mistake in the pattern, or a stitch had dropped, and now she had to go back a row. She set down the needles. I still see that moment clearly. The way she laid them down with such care, as if they were precious, and picked up one of the threads. Her hands were old, but not trembling. Not trembling at all. I could have asked, "What are you knitting?" That would have been a normal question, a human question. But I didn't ask. And she didn't ask me why I was traveling this route, or where I was going. That was the secret of this journey, I think now. We didn't need to speak. There was no empty space between us we had to fill. The space wasn't empty. It was filled with the rhythm of the needles, the sound of the train, the snow that now and then tapped against the windows. Outside, it had grown cold. I could see it. The landscape had grown greyer, duller, as we approached Tübingen. Or no, we'd already passed it. We were somewhere between places, in that transition. What is the right place for thoughts? She said, "Scarf." That was the first word. Not, "I'm knitting a scarf," or "This will become a scarf." Just, scarf. She still didn't look up. The word wasn't directed at me, or it was directed at the world, or at the needles, or at the scarf itself. "For whom?" I asked. That was my mistake, I think. I shouldn't have asked that question. It might have broken the intimacy. But it didn't. She said, "I don't know yet." And she picked up her needles again. Click, click, click. The next hour passed like a minute, or a minute passed like an hour. Time is a peculiar thing in trains anyway. The woman knitted on. The scarf, if that's truly what it was to become, grew in her hands, row by row, meter by meter of grey wool. It was quiet work, work that knew no hurry. She could have said, "I enjoy this," or "It calms me." But she said nothing more, only click, click, click. Sometimes she sighed, but not unhappily. Little exhalations, as if she were breathing small thoughts out of herself. I noticed my eyes growing heavier. The rhythm was everywhere now. In the air, in my bones, in the waves of my blood. Darkness fell outside. This is the best time on this route, I've learned since. When the sun sets and the landscape becomes black and dark blue, and the windows reflect only the inside of the train. It's as if you're traveling through your own interior. The woman was now only a silhouette, but her hands were visible, illuminated by the pale light falling in from the front of the carriage. Her hands moved, and the needles gleamed, and the click, click, click was now all there was. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't say good night or sleep well. The train slowed. I felt it, though I was nearly asleep, and she stood up. She packed her scarf, or the beginning of a scarf, into a brown bag. Her needles came to rest as if they wanted to sleep. She took her coat, and then she was gone. I opened my eyes, not fully, just a crack. She left the train at an unknown station, and I saw only her back, her dark blue coat, vanishing into the night. But the rhythm, that click, 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 it remained. It stayed in my ears, in my heartbeat, in the rolling of the train beneath me. I pressed my head against the window pane, which was cold and strange, and I closed my eyes completely. The train sang its song, and underneath I could still hear the needles. Click, click, click. And then I was gone, into a dream of grey wool and needles that moved without hands to hold them. A scarf that grew and grew without ever being finished, without ever having an owner. Just wool, just movement, just the gentle... Ah, you ask me about this door, the one I wanted to tell you about. Lean back and make yourself comfortable. It's a story about what hides in the hidden corners of trains, in rooms where passengers don't go. It was on one of those autumn evenings when I sat alone in that train compartment and the landscape glided past like a film that had played 100 times. I'd been traveling who knows where, for at my age the destinations matter less than the journey itself. The people, the places I saw, they blended into one single, gentle memory. That evening, as the sun hung orange in the sky, I took a walk through the train, past the dining car where a lonely man sipped from a coffee cup, past the compartments where families were putting their children to sleep, deeper and deeper into the dark corridors. The train's corridors grow narrower the deeper you go. The ceiling grows lower, the lights grow dimmer. You hear only the rhythmic breathing of the motor and the soft rolling of the wheels on the rails. It's as if you're walking into the belly of an animal, into the place where the train's heart beats. I hadn't been here in a long time, and I wondered what suddenly drove me to explore these spaces. And there it was suddenly, behind a heavy door marked Staff Only. This door was nothing remarkable at all, grey as a mouse with a faded sign. But when I touched it, I felt something warm, as if it had been lying in the sun, although the artificial air ruled everywhere in the train. You'll understand this if you ever experience such a moment yourself. It wasn't a moment of fear, but of curiosity, gentle and warm. I opened the door, and it glided silently open, as if it had been waiting to do that for a long time. Behind it lay not the baggage car I'd expected, but a room full of twilight and golden dust dancing in the air. Time seemed to flow differently here. The air was warm and moved slowly, like a beautiful dream. Everything was still. And then I saw the window, a large, soft window through which poured the light of the past. The light was not like the normal light we all know. It was old and delicate light, golden and full of memory. It flowed through the window like honey, weightless and sweet. I couldn't resist. I walked closer and looked out. Through this window, I could see a summer day, a day from many decades ago. There stood a child on a platform, perhaps 8 years old, in a light, pale dress. It held the hand of an older man, a grandfather, probably. They were waiting for a train, and the grandfather was showing the child something in the sky. A bird, perhaps, or just the clouds. The child laughed, but it was a quiet laugh, the kind of laugh in a dream. The sun shone down on both of them, golden as honey. I recognized the man. It was my grandfather, and the child was myself, as I had been, long before the years shaped me. But I also recognized that this wasn't really a memory I knew. I didn't remember this exact moment, yet it felt more true than anything I'd ever experienced, as if it had always lain in my soul, waiting only to be seen. The child and the old man stood in the heat of the day, and yet it seemed to matter nothing to them. They were quite peaceful with each other. The grandfather wore an old suit and a grey felt hat. His hand on the child's shoulder was large and gentle. The child wore a dress with lace edging and its hair glowed. They waited. They waited for the train. The old man pointed at something in the distance, and I followed his gaze. There it was, the train, golden in the sun, slowly coming closer. And I knew that this was the same train I was now sitting in. The same train I'd been traveling in since that day many decades ago. Somehow, the train had carried me all these years, and now it was showing me that everything had always been. That I'd never arrived anywhere but only traveled, and that the journey itself was the arrival. I felt my eyes grow heavy as I stood there watching. The child and the grandfather turned around just as the train arrived, and the grandfather lifted the child up high. The child waved, and I waved back, although I knew they couldn't see me. But perhaps they saw a trace of me, a hint of the man I would become. The train come closer, and its whistle was sweet like music. The door behind me grew warm, as if wanting to call me back. I turned around, and the golden air grew thicker, and the conductor's voice called from a distance. I walked back through the door, and it closed quietly behind me. The train rattled quite normally, and I was back in the gray corridor where everything looked as ordinary as before. My hands trembled a little as I started moving again. I didn't know what I'd seen, but it had a depth, a truth that had changed me. But you understand, I wasn't deceiving myself. I knew it had been real, in the way that dreams are sometimes more real than waking life. I went back to my compartment and sat by the window. The landscape had now grown dark, and only here and there blinked the lights of distant houses. I closed my eyes and thought of the boy in his pale dress and the grandfather's hand, warm and safe. The train traveled on, and I knew I would always travel. that I would always be on this train, that I would always be the child holding the hand of a man who loved me. And someday, perhaps, someone else would open this door and see me, with my hand outstretched to the child I would protect. The door is still waiting. I'm certain it's still warm when you touch it. And every time the train travels this route, it's there, hidden, waiting. It doesn't lead just anywhere. It leads only where you need to go, to the moments you forgot you had. That's enough for tonight. The door remains closed, but it waits. It knows that one day you will open it to see your own story, the scene that always slept within you. It was as if the door had shown me a great truth, a truth I'd always known, but had to forget to find again. The station in the past, the grandfather, the child, the train gleaming in the sun, all of that was still real, still alive, not in the past, but everywhere, simultaneously. The door had shown me that time isn't linear, but a great, still ocean where all moments exist beside each other. Since that evening, I haven't been the same. I travel with this train and see doors everywhere. I see the door in my heart that leads to my former self. I see the door in other passengers' eyes that leads to their own memories. And I know that when I'm ready, I can open any of these doors, and I can see all these lives, all these moments that exist simultaneously. Since then, I've been a different person. Or perhaps I'm the same person, but I know it now. I know that we're all traveling on this train since that day, from that day. And the train travels forever, and we travel with it, all of us, the grandfathers and the children, and the men we become. Let yourself fall into sleep now, very gently. The train carries you, as it always has, and you're never alone. The door waits for you somewhere in this train, and when you're ready, you'll find it. Sit yourself down and look out the window there. Do you see that river below? Today, I want to tell you about something I watched one evening as the sun slipped slowly behind the hills and turned the whole world into gold and blue. It's a story about water and time, and about how nature sometimes shares a secret with you when you're ready to truly see it. The river I'm speaking of wasn't anything particular. I'd seen it 100 times on my train journeys. Just a river threading its way through green meadows, past old mills and stones that had been lying there for centuries. The banks were thick with wildflowers, and sometimes you'd spot birds landing on the water before taking off again into the air. On certain days, you'd see children playing along the banks, tossing little stones. But that evening, well, something was different. I'm not quite sure when I first noticed it. Perhaps 10 minutes into the journey, perhaps an hour. Time had grown rather blurred, you see. I was tired from traveling, you understand. One gets tired sitting in a train for hours on end. Your eyes grow heavy and your thoughts lose their sharpness. And in that fatigue, you begin to see things rather differently. Or perhaps you finally see them as they truly are, without the sharp edges of a wakeful mind. The river was flowing backwards. I saw it all at once. Or Or perhaps I'd been seeing it all along, and my mind had simply refused to make sense of it. The water that normally flowed gently northward toward those distant mountains was now moving in the opposite direction. But there was nothing fearful about it. It was peaceful, you see. The water caught the setting sun and glimmered, and the movement was so gentle you could almost have thought it an illusion. I leaned closer to the window for a better look. The train was moving slowly, and the glass was clear. I could see leaves drifting backwards, little branches swimming against what should have been their natural course, and on the surface, the clouds reflected themselves and seemed somehow to be swimming backwards too. But no one else in the carriage appeared to notice. The old gentleman across from me had his eyes fixed on his newspaper. The mother, with her son, was eating an orange and laughing. The woman at the far end of the compartment was absorbed in her mobile telephone, lost in her own world. All of them were deep in their own private worlds. You might think I should have called someone over to see it, but I didn't. The secret was too precious, too quiet to be broken. It was as if the river had chosen me alone to witness this moment when nature showed me that time too can move in the other direction, that flowing forward isn't always what flowing must mean. I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Could it be possible? Had the sun, sinking so low, somehow altered the laws of physics? Was this one of those places where the world grows thin, where the ordinary rules don't quite hold as firmly? I thought of old tales, of wizards and fairies, of places where time itself vanishes. But this wasn't some dark, magical place. This was gentle and beautiful. My grandfather had told me about such places once, before he passed. He said there were cracks in reality all over the world, places where the impossible became possible. And you could see these cracks sometimes, if you were paying attention, if you were ready. I'd thought he was dreaming, but now I knew he'd been right all along. The river flowed onwards, backwards, ever backwards, and with it the heat of the day flowed away. The sun sank deeper, and the colors grew warmer. The water turned orange, then red, then dark red, like liquid fire. I watched a bird reflected on a stone that then reversed itself and flew up into the sky. Or perhaps it was flying forwards, and the whole thing was simply a matter of perspective. Time seemed to stretch itself out. I couldn't have said how long I sat there watching. Seconds and hours blurred together. The train continued with its steady rhythm, but I was no longer quite in it. I was in the river too, in the water, in this time that flowed backwards. I wondered where the water was going. If it was flowing backwards, it must be returning to its source, to the place where everything began. Perhaps back to the rain that formed it 1,000 years before. Perhaps back to the day the river first flowed. Perhaps the river had grown tired of the journey forward and wanted to see what it had left behind. Perhaps the water longed to be young again, to be rain again, to stand at the beginning once more. The train began to curve, and the river disappeared from my view. I leaned further from the window, but I couldn't see it anymore. Only the hills and a few last lights of the day as it slipped away. I settled back into my seat and closed my eyes. The image of that backwards flowing water remained in my mind, golden and gentle. The gentleman across from me turned another page of his newspaper. The mother and son had fallen asleep. The woman at the far end put her mobile away. But I knew what I had seen, and that was enough. That's the beauty of these journeys, don't you see? You witness things that perhaps are meant only for you alone. You experience moments that belong to no one but yourself. The river will perhaps flow forwards again tomorrow, the way it always has. Or perhaps it always flows backwards, and it's only the eyes of the observer that determine which direction is which. I'll never know. But I'm grateful I had that moment, that quiet, gentle moment when the world shared a secret with me. A secret that belongs to me, all mine, forever. Since that evening, I've traveled past that river many times. And sometimes, when the sun sets just right and the world turns golden, I look out and the river flows backwards. Just for a moment, just for me. And I know that other passengers must have their own such moments. That the older gentleman with his newspaper, the mother with her son, the woman with her telephone, that they too have their own rivers, their own moments when nature speaks to them. The river has become my secret. It's a secret I carry like a precious stone in my pocket. When I'm feeling low, I think of that backwards flowing river, and my heart grows lighter. When I doubt whether the world is still beautiful, I look out at that river, and I know that it is. The river has taught me that reality is more malleable than we think, that it can bend, that it comes to meet us when we're ready to truly see. It's as though the world whispered to me that evening. It showed me that I'm not fixed in one direction, that I too can move backwards, that I can return to my beginnings if I wish, that it's never too late. The river doesn't simply flow forward, carrying everything with it. It can turn around, reinvent itself, flow back to the sources where everything began. And now you should drift into sleep with me, as gently as water flows into a river. Let your thoughts flow as they will. The river carries you. The sun sinks behind your eyes. The river flows within you, backwards through the years of your dreams. You glide back to places of rest, to moments of stillness. The sun sets behind your eyes. And so we traveled on, the train and I and the few other passengers who sat with me in the compartment or in the neighboring ones, each in their own small corner of the world, each on their own journey into sleep. The warmth of the carriage, the soft crackling of the heating, the clack of the wheels on the rails, all of it became one shared song, a song without words, a song that carries you and soothes you and says, "You may let go now. You may rest now." The train travels on for you. Time travels on for you. The world sorts itself out while you sleep. Listen now. Do you hear that? Yes, there, in the corner of the compartment. A clock is ticking. It's an old clock, with brass numerals and a face that's yellowed with age. Nobody knows who it belongs to. It's always been here, you might say, just like the windows and the velvet seats. Today, I want to tell you a story about that clock. A story about what clocks dream when they think no one is listening. It was around midnight, or nearly so, when I first noticed it. I couldn't sleep, which happens often at my age. The thoughts hop about in the night like caged birds, forever anxious, forever restless. I was sitting in my seat, staring out at the darkness sliding past. Nothing but black shadows and the odd distant light. A forest glided by, dark and dense. And then I heard it. The clock's ticking had changed. Normally, a clock ticks steadily, evenly, like a person's heartbeat. Tick-tack, tick-tack, always at the same pace. But this clock began to tick in the rhythm of someone breathing. The ticking slowed, grew deeper, grew more leisurely. It was as though the clock itself was sleeping and dreaming. The hands no longer moved in regular jumps, but glided smoothly forward, as though they had no fixed destination. They turned, yes, but as if they were dancing, not marching in step. I got up and went to the clock. My legs were stiff from the long journey. It hung on the wall above the luggage rack, tucked away in the half-shadow. Its face was peaceful, the hands pointing to something impossible. Somewhere between 11 and 12, between tomorrow and today. The glass was warm when I laid my hand upon it, as though the clock had the temperature of a living body. And yes, you're right to doubt, but I assure you, this truly happened. The clock was breathing. I felt it beneath my fingers, a gentle rising and falling, the way a child breathes when falling asleep after a long journey. The ticking grew even slower. It was no longer the ticking of a clock at all, but the breathing of someone sinking into a deep dream. And in that moment, I understood that the clock wasn't simply showing time. The clock was experiencing time, living through it, dreaming it. It was a gentle ticking now, soft as rain, delicate as music, perceived only at the edges of hearing. I wondered what the clock was dreaming. What does a clock dream about? Does it dream of hours that rushed past, of minutes that seemed to last forever? Does it dream of the thousands of movements its hands have made since it was created? The train lurched slightly, and the clock seemed to purr like a cat sitting contentedly on a calm person's lap. I settled back into my seat and continued watching the clock. The pale light of night fell upon its face, and I saw the gleam of the glass, the reflection of the hands. They continued moving, slowly, sluggishly, as if wading through a dream. The hour hand dreamed of the long, silent hours before dawn. The minute hand dreamed of the quick moments that flew past like butterflies. And the second hand, it had gone still, wouldn't move at all, sleeping more deeply than all the others. Perhaps the clock dreamed of the people it watched. All these travelers who sank into their seats, closed their eyes, sent their thoughts into other worlds. The young man with the rucksack who was always searching for a lost love. The old woman who whispered to herself, recounting stories from her youth. The businessman whose telephone glowed constantly, though what he really wanted was peace. The mother with her child, clinging to her as though she could protect the entire world. All these people, all these dreams. Perhaps the clock dreamed alongside them, synchronizing its dreams with the dreams of all these sleepers. It drew their dreams into itself and transformed them into time. Each dream became a second. Each prayer became a minute. And perhaps that's why its time had grown slower. For in dreams, time moves differently. A night can be a minute, or a minute can be a night. An hour of dreaming can last an entire lifetime. I felt my own eyelids growing heavy. The train rocked me gently back and forth, like a cradle. The clock breathed its sleep toward me. Its breathing became my breathing. The ticking became my heartbeat. I wasn't sure where I ended and the clock began. We were part of the same dream, all three of us. The clock, the train, and me. The night wasn't dark. It was full of light. A dark light that exists only in dreams. I could see how the clock guided all the passengers with its slow, dreaming hands. It led them through labyrinths of thought, across bridges of memory, into valleys of safety. And I wasn't alone. I was part of this great choir of sleepers, all together, all breathing, all dreaming. The train traveled through the night like a great animal that was sleeping and dreaming, and the clock was its heart, beating gently, gently, ever more gently, until you couldn't tell if it still beat, or if you yourself had become the heartbeat of the night. The night grew deeper. The other passengers had long since sunk into their own dreams. A child snored softly. A woman murmured words I couldn't understand. An old gentleman still sat awake, but his eyes were empty, as though he existed in 1,000 worlds all at once. But I knew the clock carried them all with its gentle time, its dreaming time. It wasn't simply sleeping, it was singing in its own way, a song made of seconds and minutes, a song that only sleepers could hear. A song that transformed time into something beautiful, something delicate. The clock's hands began to glide backwards, or perhaps forwards. I could no longer say which direction was which, and that was all right. In the world of dreaming clocks, there are no directions, only rhythms, only breaths. Only the dream of time flowing endlessly on. When morning came and the sun rose and the train entered a new day, the clock was normal again. Its ticking was faster, regular, ordinary. But I knew it had dreamed all through the night, that it had gathered me and all the other passengers into its dream. And I knew, too, that it would dream again as soon as the sun set, as soon as we all grew tired. Since then, I've listened to the clock differently. I don't only hear the ticking, I hear the breathing too. I hear the gentle dreams that lie between the seconds. And sometimes, when I'm very tired, I can even see the hands move, like the fingers of a sleeper dreaming of beautiful things. The clock is a doorway through which one enters the dream of the train. And now, my dear friend, the clock wants you to sleep too. You've heard the clock, felt it breathing. You are part of its dream. Let it carry you as it carries all the others. Breathe with it, slow your heart, synchronize your rhythm with the rhythm of the night. Your heartbeat becomes the ticking of the clock. Your breaths become the beat of the night. Time dreams you, and you dream time. Sink down into sleep, the way the clock sinks, the way we all sink. My eyes grew heavy, so heavy. as though someone had gently laid a warm hand across my eyelids and said, "It's all right now. That's enough for today." And I heard the train, ta-dum, ta-dum, and I heard the quiet breathing of another traveler who had already fallen asleep, and I heard the distant sound of wind against the window panes, and all these sounds were like a soft blanket being laid over me, layer upon layer, warmth upon warmth, until I felt nothing but the gentle gliding of the train through the night. The train rolled smoothly on, and outside, the world was now completely dark. Just a few lights in the distance, solitary windows where other people too were settling into rest. I thought about how many people at that very moment were falling asleep across the world, each in their own bed, in their own compartment, in their own room, and how we were all part of one great, quiet movement, a movement into sleep. The rhythm of the wheels on the rails, ta-dum, 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 was like the breathing of a great, friendly creature that carried us all together, through the darkness, through time. Settle yourself back and make yourself comfortable. I've got an old mail sack here, all dusty, that I found in one of the compartments, and inside are letters. Old letters. Letters from everywhere. Some have yellowed with age, their corners frayed and soft. Some are still white as fresh snow. But the remarkable thing about these letters isn't the words written on them, but the stamps. The stamps tell a story of countries that perhaps never existed. Or perhaps they still do, somewhere, in another dream. I began to examine the stamps, one after another. The mail sack was small but endless, like the sort of bag a magician has. There was one with a picture of a city I didn't recognize, buildings of gold and streets that spiraled round and round. The country on the stamp was called Aurelia. I'd never heard of Aurelia, and yet the city looked so real. Every window, every turret of the castle. The colors were brilliant red and blue, colors you don't normally see on old stamps. These colors glowed in my hands, as though someone had trapped the sun inside them just moments before. I took a letter bearing this stamp. It was addressed to a person named Helena in a city called Silver Bay, in this very land of Aurelia. There was no proper address, just these names, written in a fine, trembling hand. And yet I somehow knew this letter had arrived, that Helena had received it, sometime in a century that perhaps never existed. The paper was so delicate, I was afraid I'd tear it. It smelled of old times, of faded roses and melancholy. I set that stamp aside and took the next. This one was green and showed an endless forest with trees so tall they disappeared into the clouds. The country was called Silvara. The stamp was so detailed you could almost see the individual leaves. The letter beneath it was from someone named Thomas, addressed to no one, or perhaps to the forests themselves. I could almost hear the rustling of leaves simply from touching the paper. The more stamps I examined, the deeper I found myself drawn into this world of forgotten lands. There was Lumina, where the sun never set and the stamp glowed like gold. A stamp that shone without any light source, without any explanation. I could almost feel the eternal warmth radiating from it. There was Crystalline, where the houses were made of ice, and the stamp was bright and sharp as a crystal, glittering with frost and eternal cold. There was Melodia, a land of music and sound, and the stamp showed musical notes that formed themselves into dancing figures. The music was almost audible. There was also Aquaria, with stamps on which fish actually swam. A marvelous land beneath the water where gravity worked differently. Then there was Mistmoor and Sunwind and Whispershore. There were lands without names, lands whose names I couldn't even speak because they weren't made of words at all, but of feelings. Each stamp was a doorway into an entire world, a miniature of infinity itself. I tried to understand how these lands could exist. Were they printing errors? Were they the dreams of postmen who'd worked too long in dark cellars? Were they places that had really existed, once, in another century or another dimension? The letters were all dated, but the dates made no sense. They jumped back and forth through the decades, sometimes forward, sometimes backward. A letter from 1952, then one from 1823, then one from a year that hasn't even come yet. It was as if time had no meaning inside this mail sack. I held a letter from an island called Reverie. The stamp showed two people embracing under a tree. They were young, and the love around them was almost visible, shimmering like heat above a road. The letter was addressed to no one in particular, only inscribed with the words, "To whoever reads this." I opened it carefully, as though opening a soap bubble. Inside was a single page, and on that page was nothing but a melody. No words, just musical notes in silver instead of black ink. The notes seemed to leap from the paper like living birds. And without knowing why, I began to sing that melody in my head. And it was the most beautiful melody I'd ever heard. It was sad and beautiful, like a memory of something that never existed. It was full of longing, full of the hope of lovers. With each note I sang, I felt myself growing older and younger at the same time, as though I were living all my lives at once. The night had grown deep, and I was still sitting with that mail sack. The train rocked and swayed, and I began to feel tired, but I couldn't stop looking at the stamps. Each one was like a window into another world. Each one was a memory of a place that perhaps never existed, but which was real nonetheless, at least in my heart. I saw the lands before my eyes as clearly as the landscapes the train was passing through. I saw the golden streets of Aurelia, the forests of Silvara, the glittering ice houses of Crystalline. There were more besides, so many more. A land called Mistmoor, where it was always twilight. A land called Sunwind, where the wind sang like a bird. A land called Whispershore, where the waves whispered. Each with its own stamps, its own secrets, its own letters addressed to lovers, or to nature, or to itself. I placed all the letters gently back into the mail sack. The sack seemed no heavier, though I'd examined hundreds of letters. It was as though the sack had no weight, only history, only dreams, only the memory of lands that perhaps existed only when one was observing them. I hid it again, and in the moment I released it, I knew I might never see it again. And as I hid the sack again, in a different place than where I'd found it, I began to understand. These lands were no less real than the lands the train was passing through. Because reality isn't only what you see, it's also what you believe. And these stamps showed me that wonderful places exist everywhere. Lost places that are waiting for the right eyes to find them. Perhaps they're real right now, simply because I have seen them. I leaned back in my seat and closed my eyes. In my mind's eye, I saw all these lands. Aurelia with its golden streets, Silvara with its endless forests, Lumina with its eternal sun, Reverie with its lovers beneath trees. They were all real. They were as real as my breath. They were as real as the dreams I was about to have. And in those dreams, I would travel to these lands, would collect new stamps, would find new stories, would write new letters to places that exist only in hope. And perhaps, I thought as I closed my eyes, perhaps one day I myself would become an inhabitant of one of these lands. Perhaps someone else would find a letter from me, with my own stamp, my own story, my own secret. And perhaps they would understand that their world too is full of lands yet to be invented, of places that exist only when one believes in them. The stamps dream within you now. The forgotten lands sing to you. Let yourself be carried to Aurelia, to Silvara, to Melodia. Let yourself be carried to lands that perhaps never were, but that nonetheless live within you. And the landscape outside grew softer. The outlines of the trees dissolved. The fields became dark expanses across which the moon occasionally slid its pale light. I felt my breath grow slower, felt my heart slow, felt my whole body let itself sink downward into the warm embrace of the seat cushion, into the warm embrace of this train that carried me without any effort on my part. It was a good feeling, a rare feeling, being carried without having to do anything, simply trusting that the wheels would keep turning, that the rails would keep leading forward, that morning would come eventually. This is a story for the end of the day, for that moment when the light fades and everything grows quieter. Sit yourself down, and I'll tell you about something marvelous I watched last night. It was so delicate, so quiet, that I could barely trust my own eyes. But by morning, it had all vanished, and I was certain it had been real. Real in the way that dreams are real. The kind of real that's truer than reality itself. It began slowly, almost without my noticing. I was sitting in my seat reading a book, or trying to at any rate. The words dance about on the page when you're tired, and you're never quite sure if you're actually reading or just pretending. The night had grown dark, and the train was rocking in a rhythm that was nearly lulling me to sleep. My eyes grew heavier with each passing minute. Outside was nothing but blackness. And then I saw it. A small movement in the corner of the compartment, up there on the rack. A seed. A tiny seed, green and delicate, and it began to grow. Not quickly, not like in a film, but so slowly that you only noticed if you were watching carefully. A tiny leaf unfurled, then another. Then a stem began to grow, so thin, so pale, as though moonlight itself had brought it into being. The tree grew, and I couldn't look away. No one else in the compartment seemed to notice. The boy with his headphones was listening to music and staring out at the darkness. The elderly woman beside me was doing her crossword, frowning in concentration. The man at the far end was already asleep deeply, his head resting on the window ledge. But I could only look at the tree, watching it grow, watching it unfold. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen in my life. Not because of its size or shape, but because of the sheer fact of its existence. It had no right to be there, and yet, there it was. The tree grew larger, and with it came small leaves, delicate and green as spring foliage. They moved gently, though there was no air in the compartment except the recycled air from the ventilation system, metallic and dead. But the tree's leaves moved as though in a gentle breeze, as if someone was stroking them softly with an open hand. They made a sound, a whisper that only I could hear. And beneath the leaves, I could see small blossoms too, tiny white flowers that glowed like little stars. They were perfect, every petal, every stamen. They were real, more real than the plastic windows and the worn seats and all the other ordinary things in this compartment. It was an apple tree, I think, or perhaps a cherry tree, or perhaps a tree that had never existed before, a tree made entirely of hope and dream. I couldn't say. I only knew it was beautiful, that it was more alive than anything else in my life. I leaned closer to see better. The tree was now so tall that it nearly reached the compartment's ceiling. Its roots weren't in soil, but hung in the air, as though it were rooted in nothing but the dream that it was there. The trunk was pale and silver, almost transparent, and I could see through it. It was made of moonlight and silence. The air around it grew quieter, sweeter. I wondered how long the tree had been growing. An hour? A minute? Time seemed to have no meaning in that moment. There was only the tree and me and the gentle night. The train continued on. Stations came and went, people boarded and disembarked, but none of them saw the tree. Only I did. It was my tree, a gift meant only for my eyes. The tree's blossoms began to release a fragrance. It was the scent of rainwater and spring, the smell of gardens that had been closed for a long time. With that scent came a feeling of hope, of renewal, of something coming alive again. I breathed deeply, and with each breath, I grew calmer, more peaceful. The tree breathed its dream to me, and I breathed my dream to the tree. The little girl who'd been sitting next to me before had fallen asleep. Her head had fallen onto her mother's shoulder, and the mother was gently stroking her hair. But even she didn't notice the tree. Only I saw it. And perhaps that was the point. There were things in this world not meant for everyone, only for those who were ready to truly see them. The tree continued to grow. Now there were hundreds of blossoms, perhaps thousands. They covered the whole tree like snow, and each one glowed. It was as though the tree had an inner source of light, as though it were itself a star. The train continued on, but its rocking seemed to have slowed, become gentler, as though it too were cradling the tree. I could see tiny fruits beginning to form beneath the blossoms. Small, round, glossy fruits glowing red and orange. They hung from thin branches like little lanterns. It was as though the tree had lived through its entire life cycle in a single night, from birth to maturity. It was wondrous. It was impossible, but it was happening. And then, quite suddenly, As the first rays of sun came through the windows, golden red and warm, the tree began to fade. Not quickly, but slowly, like an old photograph exposed to light, fading before your very eyes. The tree became more transparent, ever more transparent, until it was nothing but a hint of green, just a memory of green. The blossoms dissolved like snowflakes. The fruits vanished. The roots hanging in the air became invisible. But the blossoms, those remained. They fell slowly, very gently, like snowflakes, and each one that fell on the armrest of my seat dissolved like a soap bubble, and their fragrance lingered still, a final farewell, one last breath of dream entering the waking world. The little girl beside me sniffed and smiled in her sleep, as though she were dreaming this scent too. Her mother held her closer. I sat there for a long time afterward, breathing in the scent of the tree. It was a fragrance that slowly faded, but never completely disappeared. My clothes smelled of that tree for days afterward. My hair, my skin, even my dreams smelled of that tree. It was as though the tree had marked me with its scent, as though anyone who saw me would know I'd witnessed something marvelous. The train was a normal train again. The people around me woke up, stretched, began their day. They'd noticed nothing. The tree had never been there. At least, not for them. But for me, it was as real as everything else. And its fragrance remained in my clothes, in my hair, in my heart. This is the secret of these trains, you understand? At night, when everyone is asleep, when the boundaries between dream and reality blur, then things can grow that would be impossible by day. A tree can grow in a compartment. A river can flow backwards. A door can lead into other years. And no one but you will ever know. It's a secret between you and the train, between you and the night. And now you will sleep, and in your sleep, you too will see such trees. You'll see them growing in your heart. You'll breathe their fragrance, the fragrance of hope and renewal. And tomorrow morning, when you wake, you'll remember that it's possible for wonders to grow in the night. The train went through a tunnel, and for a brief moment, it was completely dark outside. Only the roaring sound, only the echo of the wheels against the tunnel walls. Ta-dum, ta-dum. And then we were out again, and the night took us back as a mother takes her child back in her arms after a brief excursion. I thought how beautiful that is. Tunnels and night, and tunnels again, and night again, and on and on. And eventually, you can no longer tell what's outside and what's inside, because everything flows together, because everything becomes one, because sleep is so near, you can smell it. The train leaves Bregenz on a quiet winter evening, and you sit by the window as the first snowdrifts slide past. The journey to Dornbirn isn't long, but on this evening it seems to carry you into another world. Slowly, thoughtfully, like one long, deep breath. You step off and make your way out into Bregenzerwald, where the firs stand so densely packed that in winter they look like a green fortress, impenetrable, cool, mysterious. The land rolls like waves of dark green and white. Everywhere hang icicles, long, thin, glittering like crystal needles in the twilight, like the frozen hair of a goddess. On trees, on rocks, on everything where water drips and freezes. And here, in a small house with a broad roof, tucked away in this forest maze, lives an artist named Irene. She has an unusual calling, a passion few share. She creates temporary artworks from frozen water. For a few weeks each year, galleries made entirely of ice spring up in this forest before they melt and return to nature. When you arrive, she leads you out into the darkness. Your eyes need a moment to adjust, but then you see it. Everywhere, along rocks beside a frozen stream, hang her works. Icicles that she deliberately freezes into specific forms, some thin as thread, others thick and twisted like rope. Some are completely clear, others contain air bubbles that glitter like tiny stars within. In the moonlight, they look like an enchanted architecture, an entire city made of ice. "This is my current installation," Irene says quietly. She's a woman in her 60s, with silver hair emerging from beneath a woolen hat. Her fingers are red with frost, but her eyes glow like fire from deep within. "I call it Forest Stream. That's what I see. A river frozen solid, but in a way that isn't violent, but gentle, intentional. In this forest, life always flows on, even in the deepest winter. The stream is frozen on the surface, but underneath the ice, the water still flows. I try to show that, this duality between stillness and movement, between snow and water, between what you see and what you feel." You walk with her alongside the stream, and she shows you her techniques. The stream itself is partly frozen, and the ice sculptures hang like an excess of beauty. "You need absolutely perfect conditions," she explains, gently touching one icicle. "The temperature must stay constantly below -3 degrees. The wind mustn't be too strong, but it must blow just enough to freeze the water droplets slowly, a few millimeters a day. Too fast, and the icicle becomes brittle. Too slow, and it rains before the process is complete. And then, and this is most important, you need patience, a great deal of patience. You need a mind that understands that beauty cannot be rushed." She leads you to a rock where a particularly impressive work hangs. A spiral icicle, as thick as an arm, twisting like a pillar, like a DNA helix created by frost instead of genes. "This one took 8 days to build," she says. "Every morning when the sun rose, well, rose is generous, it simply appeared, I would check that the frost was still good, that the shape was holding. The weather forecast was my constant companion. Sometimes I had to make small adjustments, a little water here, a little there. A millimeter can make the difference between a finished form and one that melts away too quickly." You return to the house, which is warm and welcoming. She prepares tea with honey, and you sit facing each other by a window, looking out over the snow-covered forest in moonlight. "Many people don't understand why I do this," Irene says thoughtfully. "They ask, why do you create art that doesn't last? Why do your works disappear when the weather warms?" And I tell them, that's exactly the point. That's the whole beauty of it. She takes a sip of tea. The tea is still steaming, and the scent of honey and chamomile fills the room. "In Bregenzerwald, we have a different rhythm than in the city. Winter lasts a long time, and we must learn to work with what we're given. The snow, the ice, the cold. These aren't obstacles. They're materials. They're gifts from the mountain, from the sky. My grandmother told me that every season speaks a language. Spring speaks of beginnings, summer of abundance, autumn of letting go, and winter speaks of stillness, of patience, of beauty in rigidity. I listen to what the winter tells me, and then I answer with my icicles. She tells you of a special moment 2 years ago when an artist from Austria came to visit, a famous sculptor whose works stand in museums, timeless and permanent. He wanted to see her works, and Irene was nervous as a student before an exam. I thought he would think I was mad, that I was wasting my time with something so short-lived, something that inevitably disappears. All my years, all my energy, my entire soul into works that will simply be gone in a few weeks or months. But he told me something very important. He said, ephemeral art is often the most honest art. It admits that nothing lasts, and that's a good thing. It makes it valuable. It makes it real. Permanence is a lie. Everything passes. You've simply accepted that and made it your work. You look out into the night. The moon has grown brighter, and you can see the icicles from here, glittering in its light. It's like a symphony made of ice, still yet full of meaning. How long do your works last? You ask Irene. That depends, she answers. In the deepest winter, when temperatures stay stable, they can last 3, 4, sometimes 5 weeks. Under particularly cold conditions, I once had an icicle that lasted nearly 2 months. But come March, when the sun grows stronger, when the mountain air begins to change, they start to melt. The water that became ice becomes water again and flows back to the stream. And that's all right. That's the cycle. That's nature's eternal transformation. The snow will come again in December, and I'll create new works. I'll be older then, perhaps not here anymore. But that's all right. The forest will go on, the stream will keep flowing, and perhaps someone else will take up this work. She shows you photographs on her computer, hundreds of them, each one a documentation of a past artwork. This is my real collection, she says with a smile. Not the works themselves, but the memories. The photography is part of the process too. It forces me to look carefully, to see the details, to capture the beauty before it vanishes. You sit with Irene late into the night as she shows you sketches for new projects. Her notebooks overflow with ideas, drawings, notes about weather conditions that might be perfect. A large work she's planned for February, an installation of hundreds of frozen water droplets arranged to look like rain frozen into ice. She has photographs of similar works, of crystal structures in nature that inspired her. Another idea, arranging ice crystals in certain patterns to create forms visible only from above, from a bird's perspective. Secret messages for birds and helicopters, she says, laughing. As the night deepens and tiredness overtakes you, Irene leads you to a small guest room. Look, she says, pointing toward the window. Outside, in the moonlight, everything glitters. The icicles, the snow covering the trees, the frozen leaves. All of it sparkles like a dream made of crystal. That's your lullaby, says Irene. That's my forest, my stream, my art gallery. And every night is a new exhibition. Rest now, while the icicles dance outside in the moonlight, and dream of beautiful, fleeting artworks born from ice and patience. The train went through a tunnel, and for a brief moment, it was completely dark outside. Only the roaring sound, only the echo of the wheels against the tunnel walls. Ta-dum, ta-dum. And then we were out again, and the night took us back as a mother takes her child back in her arms after a brief excursion. I thought, how beautiful that is. Tunnels and night, and tunnels again, and night again, and on, and eventually you can no longer tell what's outside and what's inside, because everything flows together, because everything becomes one, because sleep is so near you can smell it. The train climbs from Chur up towards St. Moritz, passing through valleys and through tunnels that carry you into deep mountain shadows. The rails cut through landscapes of snow and dark stone. You lean back and think about where this journey will take you. In a remote village in Graubünden, between pine forests and rocky slopes, there's a house with many observation windows. There lives a woman named Sabine, who spends her entire winter with her bee colonies. She's not simply a beekeeper. She's an observer, a documenter, a guardian of the hidden world beneath the snow. When you arrive, it's early morning, in that mysterious time between night and day, when the world is still blue and the sun is just beginning to touch the mountain peaks. The sun rises over the ridge and casts long, deep shadows on the snow-covered ground. Shadows that look like fingers grasping the world. The snow reflects back the first light, and the whole world becomes golden. Sabina is already waiting for you, in a thick blue coat, with 2 large thermoses of hot chocolate steaming in the cold air. She's a woman in her 70s, with a face marked by decades outdoors, with eyes that glow like forest light, green with golden flecks. "Come," she says, her voice warm as the chocolate. "I'll show you my observation posts. This is my kingdom, my world, my passion." You go out to a slope where 3 large wooden boxes stand, the beehives. They're well insulated, with special roofs to protect against snow and ice. Sabina gestures toward them. These colonies are now in winter dormancy. It looks like inactivity, but so much is happening, if you know how to look. She leads you back into the house to her study. Everywhere stand notebooks, years of them, with handwritten entries. On the desk sits a thermometer, a hygrometer, old cameras. Every day, Sabina explains, I write down what I see, the outside temperature, the activity around the hives. Yes, there's activity even in winter. The snow coverage, where the rain has fallen, how clear the air is. She opens a notebook from 1987. The handwriting is thin, but precise. That was a hard winter, very cold, very dry. My 2 colonies survived, but just barely. The other one died. She looks at the old writing from then, from her younger hand. Her voice grows quiet. That's part of being an observer. You must accept that you can't control everything. You can only watch, document, learn. The bees teach you humility. They teach you that you're only a guardian, not a master. Your job is to create the best conditions you can, and then let natural law take its course. You sit with her at a window that looks toward the beehive side. The windows are large and clear, and you can observe the whole world of the bees if there's anything to observe. She shows you a simple hole in each hive, no larger than a finger hole in a musical instrument. That's the flight entrance. In winter it's mostly closed to keep the warmth in. The bees have a class called cleaner bees, who actively keep that entrance clear, removing small bits of snow and ice so it never freezes completely. But right at the top, see? There's a small opening, maybe 2 centimeters. Sometimes, on the warmer days when temperatures hover around freezing, individual bees come out, just to take a brief flight into the air, to test their wings. This isn't activity driven by hunger, it's simply life. Stirrings of curiosity. It's as though they're looking out and saying, yes, winter is still here. We're going back to the nest. She tells you about a day 3 weeks ago. It was one of those days when the temperature rises to 2 degrees. Not much, but enough. I saw 2 bees from this colony here. She points to the middle hive. Come out. They flew a small circle, maybe 2 meters, then flew back into the hive, and I was standing there with temperatures of -20 before and after, and I was happy like a child. I thought, yes, you're still alive. You're managing it. Sabina prepares lunch for you. Warming vegetable soup with thick bread. While you eat, she shows you her long-term projects. She documents not just her own colonies, but also works with an institute studying the effects of climate change on bee populations in the Alps. Winters are getting shorter, she says seriously. That's bad for bees. Overwintering is important. It's a time of rest, a time of recalibration. If winter is too short, the bees wake too early, then they starve in spring. You ask her when she began observing bees. She smiles and gazes into the distance, as though seeing through time itself. That was 1968. My father, he was a beekeeper, not professionally, just for the family. And one winter, I was 10 years old, he took me out to his hives. It was so cold that tears froze on my face. I wanted to go back inside, but father held my hand, and he explained to me that beneath this thick snow, a whole society sits, pressed together, sharing warmth, waiting for spring. And I was fascinated. That was the first thing that showed me that what's truly important is often invisible, that the whole wonder of nature is sometimes hidden beneath your feet. In the afternoon, Sabina takes you for a walk through the forest. The air is so cold and clear that every breath burns, and you see your breath like small clouds in front of you. The snow beneath your feet crackles with every step, a sound like the cracking of a campfire, but colder, more crystalline. The silence between the trees is absolute, a tone that is singing, though there's no sound. Only white, only cold, only the crackling. Listen, says Sabina quietly, and she stops. What do you hear? You listen intently, and for long moments you hear nothing. Your ear adapts to the silence, becomes alert to the finest sound. Then, very faintly, you hear a crackling, the sound of freezing, the cracking of ice crystals under the weight of snow, small tensions releasing. That's the mountain breathing, says Sabina, and now you see her in a new light, not as a beekeeper, but as a mystic, a priestess of nature. And somewhere here, deep beneath this snow, My bees sit and breathe too. They're part of this breath, this cycle. They're part of the earth. Back home, as the sun sets and paints the sky in violet and pink like a dream ending, Sabina sits at her desk. She opens a large bound notebook and prepares her pen. The ink is dark blue, royal blue, the color of water and depth. She writes today in a new notebook, the 5th of this winter. Her handwriting is, as always, precise, calm, written by a hand trained over decades to see details others miss. 7th of April, 2026. Temperature, -10 degrees. Snow coverage, 35 centimeters. Wind, northeast, 4 knots. Hive A. Activity at entrance, minimal. Hive B. 1 bee observed, 14:30 hours. Duration of flight, 47 seconds. Hive C. Completely still. No activity observed. Visit from a friend who understands this work. That was lovely. My heart is grateful. She looks at you and smiles, and in that smile you see an entire world. Decades of observation, of love, of patience. As night falls, Sabina takes you to a guest room with thick woolen blankets and broad windows. Outside, beneath the clear winter sky, the beehives look like small, sleeping centers of mystery. You imagine what's happening beneath. Thousands of bees side by side, creating warmth, staying awake, waiting. Sleep now, in this quiet, in this knowledge that even the smallest lives act, breathe, and hope in the coldest seasons. The train went through a tunnel, and for a brief moment, it was completely dark outside. Only the roaring sound, only the echo of the wheels against the tunnel walls. Ta-dum, ta-dum. And then we were out again, and the night took us back as a mother takes her child back in her arms after a brief excursion. I thought how beautiful that is. Tunnels and night, and tunnels again, and night again, and on, and eventually you can no longer tell what's outside and what's inside, because everything flows together, because everything becomes one, because sleep is so near you can smell it. The train departs from St. Anton and winds through the Arlberg pass route. The windows are frosted, but you can look through to slopes buried under snow. Meters and meters of white that glitters golden in the evening sun. The mountains here are higher, wilder, and the air feels denser. At a small station called Langen, you step off, and there waits a remarkable woman in work clothes, grey and practical, with thick gloves and a woolen hat. Her name is Margit, and she's one of the few women in this region who works as a professional snow clearer. It's heavy work, not the sort you find written about in books on winter activities, but brutal, physical labor in the most extreme conditions. She works with an enormous snowplow, as powerful as a small lorry, with an engine that roars like the call of the mountain itself. She clears the pass roads so that people, goods, and dreams can get through, sometimes even saving lives in emergencies. Margit is a woman in her 50s, with arms strong as tree trunks and eyes that have spent half their life under snow. You go directly to her garage, and there she sits, the machine. A large yellow snowplow with a wide blade and an engine as loud as the call of the mountains themselves. "This is my Clara," says Margit affectionately, polishing a small spot on the machine. You ask her why she's a woman doing this work. She laughs, and the laugh is warm and without bitterness. My father was a snow clearer. His father too. It was in my family, you see. When I grew up, I was wild, I was strong, and my father showed me how to work with machines. He didn't tell me this was men's work. He said this was important work. He taught me how to check the systems, how to listen to the engine, how to understand what the machine is telling you. My mother said I should think like a practical person, not like a boy, just practically. Then I left school at 16 and went for training. I was the only woman in my course, but I was also the best, and that's given me a career I love. She leads you into her house, which is simple and functional. The heating is hot, and everywhere hang photographs. Margit with her snowplow in various weather conditions, avalanches she's controlled, pass roads cleared of snow. The Arlberg pass is one of the most dangerous roads in Europe, she explains, especially in winter. Snow doesn't simply fall. It falls in quantities you can't imagine. 3 meters in a day, sometimes 4. The wind blows it into drifts, some as tall as a house. She makes you hot mulled wine with spices. My work, she says as you drink, is to keep this road open. Not just open. People need to be able to drive safely on it. Lorries need to get through. Cars need to be safe. This isn't just a road. It's a lifeline. People on the other side of the pass need medicine, food. Children go to school. It matters. She tells you about a day a month ago. It was a really fierce storm. Wind over 100 kilometers per hour. Snow so thick you can't see your hand in front of your face. Visibility, maybe 5 meters. I went up with Clara, and it was like driving into a white veil that wants to swallow you. I could barely see the road, but I know these curves with my eyes closed. The machine was at full power. The engine howls, the tracks scrape on ice, the snow plume flies to the side in waves as big as waves in the sea. And I'm sitting there in the cabin, and I can't think. I can't be afraid. I can only work. My body has to be in harmony with the machine. One unit, human and metal. You ask how long such a day lasts. It depends, she says. On a normal winter day, if there's just 2 or 3 centimeters, maybe 4 hours. But on a day like that, with heavy snow, that can be 12, 14 hours. I go up, I go down, up, down. And all that time I'm concentrated, because one mistake, one wrong move, and the whole machine could slip off the road, could get caught in an avalanche, could just stop moving. Margit shows you her logbook, a large notebook where she records when she works, how long, what conditions, how much snow has fallen, what difficulties she's encountered. That's for the administration, she says. But it's also for me, so I understand what I do. So I see that I'm doing something meaningful. This winter I've done 87 operations. That means, Clara and I together, we've been out about 300 hours just to keep the road open. That's 300 hours during which people could drive safely because I was up there with my hands on the wheel and my eyes on the road. In the evening, Margit takes you for a drive. Not with Clara herself, but on a smaller control run in her truck, another vehicle equipped for monitoring. You drive up the pass and you can really feel the power of winter, not theoretically, but immediately in your body. The wind presses against the car like invisible hands trying to push you off the road. The snow is everywhere, on the road, on the rocks, stacked on the sides into walls 3 meters high. The visibility is tight, maybe 50 meters, maybe less. "This is a normal night," says Margit calmly, her hands firm on the wheel. "Not bad, not very good, just normal. Tomorrow could be different. The mountain always decides. The mountain is the boss, and I'm just an employee." She shows you places where avalanches can happen, curves that are particularly dangerous, points where snow prefers to settle. "After 35 years, I know this road like my own house," she says. "I know where the snow will be before it snows. I know where the wind is strongest, where the cold bites deepest. This isn't magic. It's just experience, attention, and love for this work." Back home, in the warmth, Margit settles into her chair and leans back. She's tired. Not the tiredness of the body alone, but the deep tiredness of someone doing something important, something that affects human lives. Her hands are rough and scarred from years with machines, with snow, with cold. She stares into the fire. "Do you know what's most beautiful about my work?" she asks, her voice quiet but firm. "It's not recognition. That's rare. People think about the road and not about the person who keeps it clear. It's not the money. It's not much for the work I do. What's most beautiful is that I know the next morning people will be able to use this road. They'll be able to drive safely because I worked through the night. A child will go to school. A doctor will drive to an emergency. Life will go on. That's everything. And it's enough." You notice your eyes growing heavy. Margit prepares a guest room for you. Through the window, you can see the Arlberg Pass in the night, the snow glittering silver. You imagine Margit up there with Clara, the snow plow opening the way, the road gradually becoming passable again. Rest now, while the snow clearer does her duty, and sleep soundly, knowing there are people who work through the night to keep the paths open. And somewhere in this dark landscape, I still thought, other people are sleeping now in their beds, in their houses, and the moon looks down on them, and the moon looks down on us, and everything is in its place. The fields are in their place, the forests are in their place, the rivers are in their place, and I am in my place, here in this carriage, here in this warm cradle of wood and cloth and metal that carries me where I need to go, without my having to be awake, without my having to do anything except trust and rest.